People who have survived an attempted murder, what's your story? Not sure if the dude was going to actually stab me, but some arsehole tried to carjack me at knife point with my back to the car. I panicked and threw my keys and ran away thinking was I just mugged. Cops show after a couple minutes. Keys in the ignition with all my doors open. That motherfucker couldn't drive a manual transmission. Ha, I'm sorry but that's hilarious. What country you from? I sometimes cringe when I hear that people can't drive manual, but it's things like these that make it seem bearable. One night, my two stepbrothers and were walking down a dimly lit road beside a railroad switchyard, at about 10 o'clock at night. As we were walking, a white truck drove by. We didn't notice that it turned around and drove toward us again. As it got closer, someone in the truck started shooting at us. Scared shitless, we took off running for the switchyard and the cover of the rail cars. We ran through the switchyard while someone in the truck screamed "Squeal piggies." We were all three pretty large. Eventually we reached the highway and a Hardee's where a cop was taking his break. I've never been more frightened in my life. I could hear the bullets hitting the rail cars. I was abducted at a gas station during undergrad. The locks on my car were broken, and as soon as I got back in, a strange man came in and forced me to drive him to an ATM. I am paralyzed with fear, so any sense or reason I had went out the window. He claimed he worked at Wendy's and for my generosity he would give me all the Wendy's I ever wanted. On the way to the ATM he showed me pictures of his daughters, on his clearly stolen cell phone. Then a Whitney Houston song came on the radio and he starts bawling his eyes out and screaming, "Why do all the good people have to die? Only bad things should happen to bad people." I go to the ATM, take out cash, give it to him thinking it's over. He then makes me get back in the car and drive him somewhere else. We pass by some train tracks and I'm thinking this is it. This is where I will be murdered. He asks me what I'm studying in school, and I tell him biochemistry. I believe in jet propulsion and all that shit. We are not alone, aliens are among us. He then makes me pull over at a gas station and he tells me drive away sweetheart. I called the cops, had to do a lineup. Apparently this dude had done this to a ton of other women, and some were less unscathed than I was. I like that his best means of persuasion is fucking free Wendy's. I was shot while working in a small independent video game shop. This place was a very small store in a somewhat sketchy area, but we had never had problems before. On the night in question, a gentleman came in and, without saying a word, goes straight into the porn section, caged off area. The gentleman emerges from the porn cage with his selections and proceeds to toss his selections on the counter. Now this part is very important. I go to retrieve the discs for the pornography in question, which we kept in giant CD binders that held about 500-750 discs when completely full, which they were in this case, since we had just received some new stuff. As I turn to place the binders on the counter, I hear what I now know to be the hammer being cocked. At the time I thought nothing of it since it is a video game store and we had demos on and available for people to play. As I turned to face the customer, I can now see the customer has a gun out and pointed at me. A moment or two passed with neither of us saying anything, and me holding the binders in front of my chest, and then he pulled the trigger. I don't remember much else after that, mostly because I was face down on the ground trying very hard not to move, breath obviously, or make any kind of noise. I hear him go through the register. He got all $60 in there, and then go through the game cases. He stole at least 5 empty PSP game cases before he bolted. According to the EMTs who tended to me, the bullet traveling through the stack of 3 completely fullish CD binders slowed the bullet down enough to the point where it hardly penetrated. It only went about 1-2 inches deep and I somehow managed to get hit in the one area of my chest, shoulder area where nothing vital was. Long story short, guy shot me at work in order to rob the place. Porn saved my life. I had just bought a full sheet of acid. This was 20 years ago. Sorry FBI, and I went over to where my friend was living with a bunch of roommates to share the wealth. I knew most of the people he lived with, but there was one guy staying there who I hadn't met before. I basically handed out however many doses people were tough enough to take at once, including 3 or 4 hits to the new guy. We came to find out pretty quickly that the new guy had never taken LSD before. Okay, no problem. He's at home, he's surrounded by people he knows, except me. He can just chill and have a good time. We wanted to watch a movie so we landed on the Brady Bunch movie, which is trippy as fuck. By the way, everything's going good. We all start peeking and we're laughing and having a good time. And then, on the movie, the little girl Cindy is getting advice from her dad and says, "But I don't want to be a snitch." New guy stands up and draws. "Is that what you think? You think I'm a fucking snitch?" We all try to calm him down, explain to him that it's a line from the movie. We even rewind the movie so he can watch that part again. but nothing is working. He's tripping too hard to reason with, and he's convinced that we're accusing him of being a snitch. Then he starts pacing back and forth, muttering, "This is the kind of shit that makes motherfuckers kill," over and over. Great. He zeroed in on me, I'm sure because he didn't know me, and he's still pacing back and forth and muttering, but now he's giving me a death glare while he does it. I'm getting pretty uncomfortable, obviously, and I'm also peaking from like 10 hits of acid, so my ability to cope with the situation is pretty low. I stand up because, well, there's a guy I don't know pacing around behind me muttering about killing people, and I don't want my back to this dude. This would be a really intense situation even if I wasn't tripping balls, but the acid certainly doesn't help. Suddenly he pulls out a huge hunting knife, lunges at me, and tries to stab me. I dodged him. Then he made another try, but by the time his friends had jumped up and were holding him back, he's struggling to break free and screaming, "You think I'm a fucking snitch? I'll fucking kill you." And I took the opportunity to bop right on out the door. I was about half a mile from my house, but it took me about 2 hours to find it, because I was tripping so hard and I kept getting lost in my own neighborhood. Addendum. He was, in fact, a snitch, and the whole house got traded a few weeks later. A bunch of the guys who lived there got arrested for drugs, although my friend had moved out by that point, so luckily he wasn't one of them. Long story short, guy taking acid for the first time tried to stab me with a hunting knife because he thought Cindy from the Brady Bunch was accusing him of being a snitch. It turned out he was, in fact, a snitch. I was caught up between a psychotic ex-husband of our landlord and my parents once. This guy's ex-wife had 2 houses, a kinda nice one and a worse one. The better one was ours and the worse one was his. He wanted our house because technically he bought it, so it's his, despite it being under her name since he gave her the contracts. It started with threats towards us. He was too much of a coward to actually talk to my parents, but he would relay threats through his ex-wife. Then he got serious. This is where the murder part comes in. He tried to kill us. He was friends with our gas guy, so clearly some cash changed hands and the gas guy set up our pipes, so if they are moved in a certain way, they would gas the house. Eventually that happened and it was scary as balls. Now consider I was 8 at the time. My little sister was 6. I was up late, maybe 10 or 11 p.m. And suddenly I begin to feel sick and dizzy. I make my way downstairs and tell my parents, who were also feeling it but tossed it off as maybe just food poisoning. I needed the toilet, so I went. The toilet was just to the side of the leaking gas pipe, so I got a huge waft of the stuff. And as I was walking back to the living room, I am seeing double and get so dizzy I fall over, dragging one of the bikes we kept in the kitchen. Dad comes running, realizes there's something wrong finally. He wakes my sister up and calls 999. At that moment my mom passes out. Dad is doing CPR and on the phone, trying to keep my mom alive. She comes to, thank fuck, and we get for as soon as possible. There were 2 ambulances, the hazmat squad, police, the works, lined up all down my street as they drove us to the hospital. No long-lasting damage despite minor PTSD on all of our behalfs. My mum was about 3% of carbon monoxide poisoning away from death, and the only reason my dad was okay was because he smoked. What happened to my landlord's ex-husband and the guy he paid to kill us? Nothing. The police removed the gas meter as soon as they got there and disposed of it, leaving no evidence. The ex-husband was used by our landlady for a further 9 years to threaten us before we moved out. Threaten us for what? Asking for our radiators to be fixed, our shower to be fixed. It was rotting, like legitimately rotting. For our walls to be replaced, the plaster was perhaps as hard as blackboard chalk, etc. I've been relatively okay, despite my dad saying I have crazy bad PTSD from it all. 10 years later, it happened in March 2008. I'm still terrified of blood tests because the fucking nurses went straight through a nerve when they drew blood, after we waited for 3 hours in the children's hospital. And watching my mom almost die right in front of me still pops back in my mind now and again. It wasn't a pretty image. My roommate and I got shot the day I graduated from college. I got hurt pretty bad and was in a medically induced coma for a month. After I woke up, my muscles had atrophied and I had to learn how to walk again. The first time they got me on my feet was one of the worst experiences of my life. After that, I had mild PTSD that presented as me being anxious when around people, especially strangers, and I was afraid to ride in cars. No connection, just the speed we were going scared me. Thankfully that anxiousness left after 6-7 months. It took me about a year to get my body back to where it was before it all happened. It didn't really hit me until after I was released from the hospital. But when it did, I was a wreck, emotional about everything and frequent bouts of crying. Luckily this passed also. Physically, I have some gnarly scars all over my body from all the procedures the doctors did to save my life. The big thing that is still with me is a skin graft over what is medically referred to as a full ventral hernia. While I have made peace with everything that happened to me, I find it hard to be intimate with others, or even take my shirt off because of that horror show. I am hoping to see enough one day to get that fixed with surgery, and hopefully finally put all of that behind me. Edit to tell the story of how it happened. I don't like telling this story because of how stupid it is. My roommate had a chihuahua that I absolutely fell in love with and started to care for as my own. Her name was Susie, but I gave her the nickname Bitch. Dumb college kid thinking, but it was hilarious at the time to me. As a typical chihuahua, she would bark at absolutely everyone and would try to bite their heels. The night I graduated, my roommate and I were pre-gaming before going out to celebrate, and figured we should let her out in the front yard to go to the bathroom before we left. It was night, and she was invisible in the darkness. 3 guys started walking by uncaring for their safety. I started to call her back to us saying, "You guessed it, come here bitch," over and over. Being so drunk, neither me nor my roommate realized this might not have been the best name to use to call her. Anyway, the guys thought we were saying that to them and, once again, being so drunk, we couldn't de-escalate the situation. The main guy brandished a gun and we started to run back to the house. That's when the guy started shooting. I was shot 3 times in the back, and my roommate was shot in the back twice. The main guy was arrested, but we couldn't remember what he looked like, so the police ended up releasing him and dropping the case. Feel free to laugh, or whatever. I wish the story was better, like a drug deal gone wrong or something. What happened to my roommate? He fared significantly better than I did and was released from the hospital after about a week. All he suffers is some slight nerve damage. Where did I get shot? Once in my right shoulder. Thankfully I still have full use of it, and twice near my spine. Looking at Google, I would say they were around the L1/T12 and T7 bones. This happened in Phoenix, Arizona, around 44th SD at Broadway, July 7, 2012. I tried looking up a news report that I saw afterwards, but couldn't find it again. They had a picture of the parking lot, but it actually happened in the front yard. Found the article, shot at Valley Town Home. The time is way off. I think this happened around 10-11 at night. Another edit, I didn't mean to put the feel free to laugh part in bold. Reddit did that on its own. Also, I really appreciate all the support you guys have shown. It felt really good to talk about it. I haven't really told the whole story in years. Edit for everyone wondering about the doggo. She is doing great. My friend's dad and her dad's girlfriend took her in and fell in love with her. Last time I saw her, she remembered me, but was so chubby, laughing my ass off. Just think of the fattest chihuahua you can. And that was her. Not as intense as the other stories here, but my mother put some sort of incense oil into my e-cig fluid. She had found out the day before that her parents were giving their property to me instead of her. I don't know what the oil was, but whenever she would burn it, my eyes would swell and lungs would be raw for hours. And she knew it. Anyway, I had just refilled my tank that morning. I took a huge draw off the vape and immediately knew I was screwed, because it tasted intensely of the oil. My lungs suddenly felt like they were trying to turn inside out while I started coughing uncontrollably and hacking up some sort of foam. It was so bad that every breath I took in felt like fire and kept me in a chain of violent coughing and dry heaving that kept making my abdomen spasm so hard. It was like I was doing violent sit-ups over the bathroom sink. By the time it eased up, I was collapsed onto the sink and barely conscious. I was drenched in sweat and my body hurt like I had pulled nearly every muscle in it. I laid down on the floor, which was cold, and that somehow felt better. I was there for what seemed to be a really long time, and I was so drained I couldn't do anything else. I didn't report it because who the fuck is going to believe that someone poisoned vape fluid? Even I had trouble comprehending the situation. I kept the bottle for a long time, and occasionally would get it out to look at the obviously separated fluid where the oil didn't mix with the PG, to remind myself that really happened. A few weeks later I also got a visit from APS. After she told them that I had strong-armed my grandparents into handing over the property to me and was stealing from them. Good times. Sorry for the run-on sentences. Whoever reads all that. I've never really typed all that out before and struggled to describe it. I think I see why your grandparents didn't want to leave anything to your mom. Probably nutmeg, which is poisonous. Holy shit, dude. You could have died so easily. There is so much to this story that I don't have time to write out. I'm working. Here's the abridged version of what happened to me in my upper middle class suburban family. I could write all day about every detail, but my hands are already shaking from adrenaline, so pardon any errors. My oldest of 3 of us, I'm the youngest, brother was a Marine, came home from the war in pretty rough shape, struggled with PTSD pretty seriously and was afraid to seek help and or thought it wouldn't be worthwhile, but had made a lot of progress after getting out of the Marines, good FIFO job, girlfriend, and started a band. Had some issues with substance abuse and whatnot. My brothers and I were best friends. We were really close. We got into a fight one night. I was 20 and had just picked up my brothers from a bar. He tried to choke me out while I was driving and he was in the back seat. I had some shit to do and he wanted me to take him somewhere and I was just trying to take them home. I remember my other brother diving into the back seat to get him off of me as things started going dark. I got the car to a stop and they are fighting in the back seat. I open the car door and they spill into the street. It ends. No, it doesn't. My oldest brother went to the other one's house that night, broke in while he was sleeping, and beat the shit out of him, threw him through a wall. Let me pause here. My sister was meant to get married on a Saturday. This was the Tuesday before. They got into it again the following Wednesday morning at my parents' house. Someone called the police and the older one was sent to the hospital for a psych evaluation. He passed it. Not really. The person who gave the evaluation was not a doctor and was not qualified to perform it and was released. I was living with my parents at the time. My brother shows up at like 1 AM on Friday after the rehearsal dinner, breaks in. He's hammered, yelling at my parents who are in bed. I'm in the doorway to my parents' room and I realize he has his .357 on him. I feel in my bones that this isn't going to go well and make a move to get the gun away from him. We start fighting. He was about twice my size. He basically slams me up against the wall and pistol whips me in the forehead and it starts leaking pretty good. He shoots my father in the back. Then he shoots me in the chest, and kills himself in front of me. He fell on my mother, snaps her leg and she still has trouble walking today. 5 years, 1 month and 2 days later, there was blood everywhere, 3 people all bleeding to death in one room. My lung exploded. I can still remember feeling my chest bubbling with every breath, drowning in my own blood. Police flooded my house after about 15 to 20 minutes. I flatlined twice. 10 days in ICU, 2 more weeks in the hospital, lost half my left lung, 4 shattered ribs, some nerve damage. But I am alive, so is my father. To this day I wonder if I had just driven him to where he wanted to go, how different things could have been. I miss him every day. He wasn't an evil person. He wasn't a bad person. He just needed some help. We now run a non-profit in his name. Holy shit, man. You are a real warrior for surviving that. I'm so glad you two are alright. I wonder what happened to him in the Marines that made him that way. The lack of treatment veterans receive in this country after putting them through hell is a great injustice to the soldiers and their families. My girlfriend's ex-boyfriend ambushed us coming home one night, around 1 AM. He stepped from the garage and shot me in the chest. Then as my girlfriend pushed her son toward the dark bushes and told him to run, she tripped and fell. He shot her 6 times in the head and chest with a .357, reloaded, and was scared off by the blazing security lights of our neighbor. Her son escaped because of the lights. I lived by playing dead, pull my cell out when he ran off. And I misdialed an old roommate because I thought holding 9 on a Nokia, dialed 911, got 911 and cops. Paramedics showed up after her son helped get a rag to cover what I thought was one hole. The necklace I was wearing deflected the bullet, novelty dog tag, and bullet went sideways out chest and into my arm. 1 bullet, 3 holes. 4 when they cut it out of my arm on other side where it stopped just under the skin. Her son is pretty fucked up by it all, to say the least. I've recovered mentally, I think. Lesson: don't get involved with crazy fucks. Screw the restraining order and move somewhere they won't find you. Your life isn't worth staying where you are and hoping. She was killed the day after she had the restraining order served. They only make things worse if someone thinks they'll have you, or no one will. My goodness, what a terrible, terrible thing to do to another human. Do you mind me asking, did they catch him and is he still in prison? Also, have you tried therapy to help with the disconnection you're feeling? Court. 3 years to finally finish trial. Life plus 25 year. No parole option. 1 year was just waiting for extradition. Another year of psychiatric bullshit please, and then a year of actual court processes. I should have sought therapy then. I didn't, and I got through it, but I'm sure friends, family suffered through it by helping me instead. Get therapy, is my advice to anyone in a similar situation. With that out of the way, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon if you want more content to keep appearing in your subscription box. Thanks for watching and until next time.